Please welcome to the stage Constance Wu, actor, producer, and author of Making a Scene, with Atlantic staff writer Shirley Lee.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Constance, thank you for joining us.
Yes, good to be here.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Constance is an actor, producer, and author. She's best known for her work in the films Crazy Rich Asians and Hustlers, as well as the TV sitcom Fresh Off the Boat. I heard a woo.
That's my last name. Don't wear it out.
Her new book, Making a Scene, is an intimate and personal collection of essays, and it is out starting October 4th. So, Constance, let's start there.
Yes, sure.
So, as I understand it, this book started out really differently.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In the acknowledgments, you write, and I'm going to quote you, that it was supposed to be a radical activist tome. So
Yeah.
how did it transform?
It really became what it finally was in the past few years, in the past 3 years, but I started writing it in 2016, around the time of the election. I think we were all feeling so many emotions around that. I was like, I have to put it somewhere, I have to say something. And then I would try to write something smart and fierce, and then I'd read it and I'd be like, this is crap. This is so bad. It's all over the place. But while I was writing, every once in a while, there'd be a little nugget of a personal story. Something as simple as how it feels to make bread. Your first car you had in high school, your first love. And then I was like, let me write about those things. And then it just flowed out of me, and I realized that was the book I needed to write, a personal book. Because in many ways, I think, especially now with, the way it feels like women's bodies are being governed, I almost think thinking of women as real human beings shouldn't be a political statement, but it almost has become that. So yeah, I think by writing a personal book, hopefully it's really just a more human book.
Yeah, I am curious, at the risk of over summarizing your book, you do cover, you cover a lot of sensitive subjects.
Yeah.
And you talk about your time in Hollywood, how glamorous it can be and how grueling it can also be. And well, you also touched on, working at a bakery, making bread. So when you looked back on the phases of your life and your career, what was the toughest time to revisit and process in writing?
The last essay I wrote, I was actually pretty resistant to write it, was the one about my experience on Fresh Off the Boat. And my publisher really encouraged me to write it, because she was like, that's what people want to hear. And I was like, no, I'm done with that chapter in my life. And then I was like, okay, I'll write it as an exercise. And then I eventually realized it was important to talk about, because I did have a pretty traumatic experience my first couple of years on that show, and nobody knew about it, because that show was historic for Asian Americans. And it was the only show on network television in over 20 years to star Asian Americans, and I did not want to sully the reputation of the one show we had representing us. And so therefore I kept my mouth shut for a really long time about a lot of sexual harassment and intimidation that I received the first 2 seasons of the show. Because after the first 2 seasons, once it was a success, once I was no longer scared of losing my job, that's when I was able to start saying no to the harassment, no to the intimidation from this particular producer. And so I thought, you know what? I handled it. Nobody has to know. I don't have to stain this Asian American producer's reputation. I don't have to stain the reputation of the show. But the thing is, bad feelings don't go away just because you will them to. They're inevitably going to come out somewhere. And then when the show was renewed, after they had told me it likely wouldn't be, I made some very profane, reckless tweets that sort of ignited this whole pile-on of hatred towards me, because I just had a hit movie, Crazy Rich Asians. So it looked really bad. From the outside, oh, she thinks she's this big movie star, when really it was just I wanted to have a fresh slate where I didn't have to start a show with all these memories of abuse. Because every day, because a lot of people knew it was, not a lot, a few people knew it was happening. And to go to work every day and see those people who knew that he was sexually harassing me, being buddy-buddy with him, it felt like a betrayal every time. So to like have to see that at work every day, and of course I don't blame them because he could fire them too, right? Everybody's looking out for their own job, but it felt like a betrayal. And so I loved everybody on that crew, and I loved working on that show, but it had that history of abuse that it started with. And even though I handled it after 2 years, I was looking forward to a clean slate. So I was a little bit, I feel like those tweets that came out were the emotions I suppressed, that I thought I could will away, coming out in another way. And, you know, it negatively affected my career, but in many ways it positively affected me personally because it made me take a break from my career, made me go to therapy and understand it, and ultimately come out better because of it. Sorry. I didn't want to cry, but it's like every time I talk about it, I start crying, and every time I'm like, I'm not going to cry this time. But it was really hard to hold it in for so long. So
it's all right. I'll say that when I was reading that chapter, it was making me cry because some of the figures that you write about, I've seen them be buddy-buddy. And without that context, when everybody saw your tweets, it was, you could very easily
It looked
assume.
real bad.
It looked real bad. I mean, well, I do want to talk more about that because, the most recent thing that you did in the public eye was return to social media.
Yes.
Also
something that my publisher very much encouraged me to do, and I was very resistant to for a long time.
I'm sure it took 3 years, away. You came back with a statement that was really vulnerable. You wrote about your suicide attempt in 2019. Now, you did just say that your publisher pushed you to return to social media, but why was it important to process publicly?
Well, I think my publisher and I had different goals. After going through a lot of therapy, and I couldn't have done this 3 years ago when I was still very raw and wounded after having come out of the hospital after the suicide attempt, but I had taken 3 years to heal, and so I felt ready and capable, and I felt it was important for me to help people. I think my publisher felt it was important to sell books, but let me just say, I think I'm not knocking this, but I think a lot of people don't read these days, and if the thing that drove me to a suicide attempt was hatred on Twitter, the people I'm trying to reach and to help who are going through what I went through when I ended up in the hospital, they're probably not out there reading self-help books. They're there scrolling their feeds and feeling so alone and feeling awful. So I realized it was more important to me to help people like that than I was afraid of social media. And the place I'm going to reach them, not with my book, but with my social media statement, was going to be social media. So they're scrolling and they see like, oh, this person who seemingly has it all together, wow, they struggled too. And I wanted to make it clear that yes, I struggled too, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that it's okay to ask for help. Because there is, as we often hear, a stigma in the Asian American community on mental health. And I felt like it was important to open up that conversation, not having to do with my book, but just in a forum where I would reach the most people it would help.
Yeah, absolutely. So during your time away from social media, I mean, it's fascinating, when you left social media.
A lot of things happened during that time.
A lot of things happened during that time. You started a family, you had a baby.
I had a kid. I reconciled with my mom, who I hadn't spoken to for 5 years, who's here today. A lot of healing.
A lot of healing happened in that time.
I didn't get COVID, still haven't.
Oh.
I feel that makes me very, I feel proud of it.
Yeah, you did just test negative backstage. So
yes.
Yeah, check.
I was like, another one. Yeah, got it.
So, it seems like your priorities really changed. I want to know what it was like, how has this semblance of anonymity affected your creative process, your creative endeavors? Because as an actor, you need to observe, but for a couple years there, you were being observed. And
yeah. Yeah, I really refocused on my values. And it's still acting. A big theme of the book is how art is healing and how acting, since I was a kid, doing community theater was always a place that was like safe and a refuge. And then going to Hollywood, where there was all this abuse, and mind you, all this abuse that was happening to me before the Me Too movement. So I didn't, and since then I've actually met other Asian actresses who have gone through the same thing with this particular Asian American producer. And it's funny because he treated white and black women with the utmost respect and deference, and reserved his misogyny and power plays for Asian women. But since this was before the Me Too movement, nobody was talking about it, not even to each other. And so, oh my God, I forgot your original question. What was it? I had a point.
We'll get there. It was about the anonymity that you experienced.
Oh, yes. So art is healing, right? But when you're an actor, you're sort of there to look at the human experience. But if you're not having a very, if you're sort of removed from the world, it kind of stops that a little bit. And so I think going to the hospital and getting help and realizing there were things that I needed to look at in my life, like how I hadn't spoken to my mother, and a lot of that was because I didn't know how to handle fame. I don't have parents in the industry. I don't have relatives in the industry. There's no class in drama school that prepared me for any of it. So a lot of, and I wasn't a teenager, but I was probably acting like one. Like a lot of teenagers, you sort of take it out on your mom and do that. And I did that, and I'm very sorry for it and continue to be, but becoming pregnant and talking with her was ultimately really healing. And so I'm very grateful for the experience. And I don't know if I'm gonna stay on social media. I probably think I'm not. But for the time being, I'm there just to make sure that people who need to know that there's help out there so that they know.
Yeah. I'm curious, I want to rewind a little bit to, your profile skyrocketed between, I'd say, 2015 to, 2018. And the online backlash came in 2019. During that time, I mean, what did you do to quiet the noise, if anything?
I think that was the problem. I didn't have a place to quiet the noise. I write about this in one of my essays is because I was really into doing therapy even before I quote unquote became famous. But once I started doing the show, I was working 60-hour work weeks. That's not a complaint, it's just a description of the hours. And my therapists kind of work 9 to 5. So it's I didn't have any place or time to have appointments. And she also had 2 kids and a newborn baby. So I felt really guilty asking her to take time out of her weekends, which she totally did when she could. But I didn't have that. And I think that's another message I would like to send to young actors is to recognize, when you're young, or even young people in the professional industries, in more corporate places. When you're young, you're so hungry and you're hustling, you're I gotta focus, gotta do these things. And I think it's important to understand that your well-being and mental health is important during that time and to make time for it even amidst the hustle.
Yeah. I ask that because, in the past couple of years, we've seen you back off of social media and then return to projects like The Terminal List. You're making public appearances.
But that was an acting project.
Yes.
I didn't return to social media for that.
Right.
Yeah.
My question is now, as you're going forward, how do you decide what to share about yourself, what not to, when to speak out, when to pull back? What is your North Star in understanding how much your professional and personal lives have to blend together?
I think it's a case-by-case basis, and it's definitely me looking at what's more important. The message I'm trying to get across or my fear of losing privacy. And there are certain things I don't share pictures of my daughter, because even though I would love for the world to know, oh my God, my daughter's the cutest thing in the world, everybody wants to everybody should see it, and of course everybody wants to show off their kid. My priority on her privacy is more important than my joy at how cute she is. So I choose her privacy. But then with the social media statement, I want privacy. I don't want to be on social media, but I want to kind of save lives and encourage people to get help. So that outweighed it. So it's a case-by-case basis. And I think it'll continue to be as social media evolves or devolves. I mean, you guys, I'm not on, I'm 40, I'm too old for TikTok, but I'm like, it's nuts.
It's a whole different world.
What's going on? People are frying chicken in NyQuil? Did you know that? This is a TikTok trend. People are eating laundry detergent?
Yeah, that
I don't get it.
That was fascinating.
But maybe I'm too old for it, yeah. I don't know.
Well, I mean, going off of that, do you think it's possible, just because there seems to be this expectation of accessibility for any public figure, especially in this industry, right? If you're going to stay relevant, you got to share parts of yourself. Especially during the pandemic, when you were receding from social media, we were seeing the backyards of celebrities' homes because that's where the red carpet was.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for any public figure today, even on a case-by-case basis, to be only known by their work, to avoid even the possibility of backlash or quote-unquote
I think it's hard. And I think that there actually are producers and studios who look at social media numbers as a hiring mechanism. It's like having 3 million followers on Instagram is way more impressive than having a PhD from Harvard. It's more valuable to them, it really is. So I think, but that's another case of weighing privacy or career. And some people, they want the career more. They want what social media will bring, and they like the outlet of expression, which if it's intuitive to you, it's natural. If it's natural to you to fry your chicken in NyQuil, go for it. I mean, don't, because I don't know the health consequences of that, but
You're
it's not my, I was never into this, I never got into this because of celebrity. I got into this because I was an emotional kid who is really loud, and theater and acting was the one place where not only was it okay to make a scene and be an emotional kid, it was actually celebrated. So that's sort of why I got into it, and it continues to be why I pursue it.
Yeah. Well, then to wrap up, going off of that, I wonder, how do you define success today? In your book, you write about the never expecting to lead a sitcom, right? You trained in theater, in classical theater.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm going to quote somebody else, and I think the second part of her quote is the part that I'm always that's the key. Maya Angelou said, "Success is liking what you do and liking how you do it." Because a lot of people like what they do, but they might do it in a shady, dishonorable way or whatever. But liking and being proud of how you do it, having integrity in yourself and in your work, that is success. So it doesn't have to do with money or, And that's how I define it. Or I'm not going to take my credit for Maya Angelou's words. She's amazing. But I come back to that a lot,
And finally, something I am curious about with your book, just to go all the way back to Making a Scene, you write about these key moments in your life as if they're scenes from a script.
Some of them, yeah.
Some of them. I was curious about that choice and who you were picturing as your reader. Do you plan on ever performing these scenes?
Oh, no, I don't plan on ever performing them. But, I think I wrote a few of the events in my book as if they were scenes in a play or a screenplay. Because I thought, rather than giving my opinion or feelings on what happened to me, part of the sexual harassment, if you just say the events and the words that happened, it has a greater effect. For example, my producer touching my crotch, and then me saying, no, don't do that, finally saying no, and then he got mad, but then he did this other thing where he, right after he did that, he touched a less provocative place. He grabbed the fat behind my tricep, jiggled it around, and I was like, what are you doing, dude? And he goes, oh, no, you have big arms. That means you're strong. Strong women are great. Good for you. If you just look at the words, it's oh, he didn't say anything bad. He said strong women are great. good for you, patted me on the back. It was a power play. It was a type of, it wasn't cool, but I, instead of saying it wasn't cool, I just said, these are the events that happen, and people can draw their own conclusions for it, so that I'm not passing judgment on him. I'm just sort of showing, like, he said these words, strong women are great. That means you're strong. Good for you.
Good for you.
Good for me, yeah. But yeah, that's why I wrote some of the scenes like that.
Yeah. Constance, thank you so much for sharing today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I think we'll wrap it here today. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everybody.